Willow Creek had always been the kind of town where nothing terrible ever happened. Tucked between quiet hills and surrounded by wide stretches of farmland, it was a place where everyone felt safe. The streets were lined with maple trees that turned bright red in autumn, and neighbors waved to each other every morning. It was the kind of town where gossip was harmless and secrets never stayed hidden for long. Until one morning in 2003, when that sense of security vanished forever. It was a cold, misty day when the body of Linda Moore was found. She was a 36-year-old schoolteacher known for her kindness and calm voice. She lived alone in a small white house at the edge of town, near the old railroad tracks. When she didn't show up for work and didn't answer her phone, a coworker went to check on her. The front door was unlocked and everything inside seemed untouched, except for the lifeless body lying near the kitchen door. Linda's death was brutal but strangely precise. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, and no theft. Her purse sat untouched on the table, her jewelry still on her wrist. What stood out most was the single old photograph clutched in her hand. The picture showed 4 smiling teenagers standing together at what looked like a summer carnival, the background blurred with lights and laughter. No one could understand what it meant or why she was holding it. Investigators from the Willow Creek Police Department searched the house for clues, but the scene offered almost nothing. Fingerprints were smudged, and the only partial prints found belonged to Linda herself. Neighbors hadn't heard any noise that night. A few claimed to have seen a man walking near her house late in the evening, but their descriptions didn't match. Some said he was tall and thin, others said short and heavyset. It was as if the figure changed each time someone remembered him. The town was shaken. Parents started locking their doors for the first time, and rumors began spreading through schools and cafes. People wondered who would hurt someone like Linda. She had no enemies, no dark past, and no history of trouble. The only strange thing police uncovered was that she had recently been trying to contact several old classmates from her high school days. No one knew why, and the names she had written down led to disconnected numbers and abandoned addresses. The investigation stretched on for months, then years, but nothing new surfaced. The old photograph remained a mystery, its faded faces haunting the evidence board. Slowly, Linda Moore's murder faded from headlines, becoming another unsolved case in a town that preferred to forget. Yet, buried beneath the silence, something darker was just beginning to stir. 5 years after Linda Moore's mysterious death, the town of Willow Creek had started to move on. The tragedy had faded into whispers and life seemed normal again. But that fragile peace shattered one rainy night in 2008 when police received a call from the neighboring town of Brookhaven. A local mechanic named Raymond Hill had been found dead in his workshop. His death was sudden, violent, and chillingly familiar. Raymond was a quiet man in his 40s, known for fixing everyone's cars and never turning down a favor. When his assistant arrived that morning, the garage door was wide open, rainwater seeping across the concrete floor. Raymond was lying beside his workbench, struck on the head with a heavy wrench. There were no signs of robbery. His wallet, watch, and tools were untouched. But beside his hand, police found something that froze them in place, an old photograph. It was the same photograph discovered at Linda Moore's crime scene, the one showing 4 teenagers smiling at a carnival. But this time, one of the faces in the picture had been burned away, leaving a small black hole where a person's head once was. Detectives immediately recognized the eerie connection. 2 victims, years apart, both clutching the same image. Coincidence seemed impossible. When investigators dug into Raymond's background, they found that he had attended Willow Creek High School in the late 1980s, the same school where Linda had taught before her death. The two hadn't kept in touch as adults, but they had been part of the same graduating class. Searching through old yearbooks, detectives found the original photograph. It appeared on a page showing a group of friends who had spent one summer working at a local camp. Of the 4 teenagers in that photo, things had taken a strange turn over the years. One of them had died in a supposed car accident in the early 1990s. Another had moved overseas. The last 2 had vanished without a trace. The connections were too precise to ignore. Someone was deliberately targeting people linked to that old photograph. Following them one by one, police questioned former classmates, teachers, and even the camp's old staff, but no one could explain what might tie them together after all these years. A retired detective from Linda's case joined the investigation, certain that both murders were pieces of a much larger puzzle. Still, no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses emerged. The photograph was the only constant clue, a silent reminder that whoever was behind it wasn't finished yet. As months passed and the case grew colder, residents of both towns began to wonder if a hidden history was resurfacing, something buried deep in the past of that smiling group of teenagers. Whatever it was, it had already claimed 2 lives. In the summer of 2012, nearly a decade after the murders of Linda Moore and Raymond Hill, a group of hikers ventured deep into the dense woods that bordered Willow Creek. The forest had always carried an eerie reputation. Locals called it Whispering Pines, a place where strange sounds echoed at night and abandoned cabins crumbled under the weight of moss and time. The hikers were following an old trail when they stumbled upon something unusual, a forgotten campsite hidden among the trees. The area looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Rusted cans lay scattered on the ground, a torn sleeping bag hung from a branch, and the remnants of a long-dead fire pit sat in the center. When authorities arrived to investigate, they discovered something buried just a few inches below the soil near the fire pit, a small rusted tin box. Inside it were several photographs, each one faded and worn, but all showing the same 4 teenagers from the earlier murder's mysterious image. The photographs appeared to have been taken at different times, at school events, at the beach, and one labeled in smudged ink on the back, Summer Camp 1989. In the camp photo, the teens were smiling, dressed in matching shirts, with a banner behind them that read Lakewood Youth Camp. But when investigators enlarged the image, they noticed something unsettling. Behind the group, partially hidden in the trees, stood a blurred figure, someone watching them from a distance. Police searched archives and discovered that Lakewood Youth Camp had burned down in 1989 during a late summer storm. Several cabins were destroyed, and one camp counselor reportedly died in the fire. The incident had been ruled an accident at the time, but the discovery of the photographs reopened long-forgotten wounds. Could the fire and the murders be connected? As the investigation continued, more strange details emerged. Soil tests around the campsite showed traces of old blood, though it had degraded beyond identification. A partially melted locket was also found inside the tin box, engraved with the initials DL. That detail caught the attention of an aging detective who had worked both previous murder cases. He remembered that one of the camp counselors who died in the 1989 fire was named David Lorne, the same initials carved into the locket. It was the first real lead in years, but it came with more questions than answers. Why were these photographs buried in the woods? Who had placed them there? And most chilling of all, was the figure standing behind the teenagers in the photo still alive, silently watching from the shadows of Willow Creek. By 2017, the cases tied to Willow Creek's strange string of murders had drifted into the realm of urban legend. Locals spoke about them in lowered voices, warning curious teenagers to stay away from the woods and the burned remains of the old Lakewood camp. But one person refused to let the story fade. A young investigative journalist named Emma Pierce had grown fascinated by the unsolved deaths, seeing patterns others had missed. She believed the truth was buried somewhere between the fire of 1989 and the murders that followed. Emma spent months digging through old records, police files, and newspaper archives. She tracked down the surviving families of the 4 teenagers from the photograph, uncovering fragments of their lives before they disappeared. What she found was unsettling. All 4 had attended Lakewood Camp that fateful summer, and all 4 had been in Cabin 7, the cabin that had burned to the ground. According to early reports, a counselor named David Lorne had died while saving the campers during the blaze. His body had been recovered near the doorway, burned but still clutching a lantern. The camp had shut down shortly after, and his death was officially declared heroic. But Emma found something the police had missed. In a forgotten article from a small local paper, there was mention of a second counselor, David's younger brother, Ethan, who was visiting the camp that week. He was never officially listed among the victims, and after the fire, he simply vanished. No burial record, no family statement, nothing. When Emma spoke with former camp staff, one woman recalled that Ethan had been distraught, blaming the teenagers for sneaking out of the cabin that night and causing the accident that killed his brother. The memory was old, but her voice trembled as she repeated one phrase she'd heard Ethan shout before disappearing into the woods. "They'll all pay for this." Piecing it together, Emma realized that each of the murdered adults had been one of those 4 campers. Linda Moore, Raymond Hill, and the 2 missing teens all shared that single haunting connection, the fire at Lakewood Camp. The photograph wasn't just a memory. It was a list, a silent message from someone who hadn't forgotten. Emma compiled her findings and sent them to the police, urging them to reopen the investigation. But before any official action could be taken, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen except her laptop and a folder of notes labeled Lakewood. It seemed someone else was following her work and watching her every move. In early 2021, the quiet of Willow Creek was shattered once again. A retired detective named Thomas Riley, who had worked both the Moore and Hill murder cases years earlier, was found dead in his small home on the outskirts of town. His body was discovered by his daughter, who noticed that his study door was open and a faint smell of smoke lingered in the air. On his desk lay an old envelope with a single photograph inside, the same one that had haunted the town for decades. But this time, every face in the picture had been violently scratched out except one. The only face left untouched was that of Emma Pierce. Police quickly linked the scene to the previous murders, recognizing the signature pattern that stretched back almost 20 years. When they tried to contact Emma, she didn't respond. Her last known social media post had been 2 days earlier. A photo of the old Lakewood camp ruins, captioned simply, "The truth is closer than you think." Investigators traced her phone signal to the edge of Whispering Pines, the same forest where the tin box of photos had been discovered nearly a decade before. A search team combed the area for days. They found her car abandoned on a dirt road, keys still in the ignition. Not far from it lay her phone, face down in the mud. When police recovered it, they found that the last video recording had been running for over 5 minutes. The footage was blurry, capturing the crunch of footsteps on gravel, Emma's heavy breathing, and faint rustling in the distance. Then, just before the recording cut off, a camera shutter clicked twice, followed by a distorted male voice whispering something inaudible. Despite extensive searches, Emma was never found. Her disappearance added a final, terrifying chapter to the already unsolved mystery. Locals began reporting sightings of a lone man wandering the outskirts of town, tall, wearing an old camp uniform, and carrying what looked like a vintage camera. Each sighting ended the same way, with the stranger vanishing into the woods before anyone could approach. To this day, the murders connected to the photograph remain unsolved. No trace of Ethan Lorne was ever uncovered, no fingerprints or DNA linked to any crime scene. But every few years, someone in Willow Creek reports finding a copy of that same photograph slipped under their door, edges yellowed, with one new face scratched away. And those who receive it all share the same fear, that the next flash of that old camera might be meant for them.